Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Questions for today's presenters can be entered into the questions section. Any questions that we do not get to, we will answer offline through email. Today's presentation will be recorded, and you will receive information in a few days on how to access the recording. At this time, let's go ahead and begin the formal part of this presentation. Welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by the Current Consulting Group and sponsored by DrugPak. Today's presentation is titled, The Value of Random Drug Testing, How to Master the Selection Process. Today's webinar qualifies for one continuing education credit from SHRM, HRCI, and CCDAP for those who attend in its entirety. You will receive information following today's webinar on how to apply for that credit. Shortly, we'll be sharing with you a short video from today's sponsor, DrugPak. The audio for the video is available through your computer speakers only, so if you have dialed in for today's presentation, please be aware that you will not hear the audio. And with that, let's watch the short video from today's sponsor, DrugPak.
Hey, thank you, Greta. It's great to be with you. David, it's great to be with you. And my name is Rick Tennant, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to David Gonzalez, the General Manager of DrugPak LLC and the original author of the DrugPak software suite for Windows. David has overseen DrugPak's transition from the desktop to the cloud, and this December, David will have worked with DrugPak for 30 years. Today, DrugPak has more than 400 customers and processes over 8 million results annually.
Thank you, Rick. I'm David Gonzalez, and it is my pleasure to introduce Rick Tennant. Rick has over 28 years of experience in the drug and alcohol testing industry. He provides expert consulting to clients in the areas of business development, marketing, and sales, training, and support. He helps clients penetrate new markets and create strategic partnerships within the industry. Rick, it's a pleasure being with you today.
Hey, thank you.
Today, we're going to draw from our experiences to talk about what it means to have a truly random selection process and discuss some of the issues people face in random testing programs.
It's not just for DOT purposes that this matters. While the Department of Transportation mandates random testing, many of you also use random testing in non-regulated employment situations. As we begin, I want to mention that during this presentation, we'll highlight three very important VIPs, or very important points to learn and remember. When each one comes up, we will make a special mention of it. So with that, let's get started.
Today, we are only going to cover topics concerning random selections. We'll talk about why random selections are used and how they're performed. We'll learn what it means to be random, briefly review the random policies mandated by the DOT, and demonstrate how an expert statistician might evaluate a random program to see if it is truly random. We will show you that there is more to a comprehensive random selection program than simply a good random number generator. This ties directly into how to protect your organization's integrity and the integrity of your random program. In addition to being unbiased, it is crucial that your random selections appear unbiased. Most importantly, we'll cover the challenges you can expect if your random selections are not perceived to be fair. Finally, we'll show you some simple things you can do to control undesirable results and how to maximize customer satisfaction. Random is a word we often use in everyday conversation. I might say, when I checked into the hotel, I was assigned room 420 at random. Or when I drove into the parking lot at work this morning, I took the first spot I found at random. Or I installed a new software update today, and now my computer freezes at random. If I were to say any of these things, you wouldn't blink, you would know exactly what I mean. These scenarios capture the essence of what randomness means to us in real life. For one thing, random means unpredictable. Until I checked into the hotel, I did not know where my room would be.
And without any discernible pattern means even continue to be unpredictable even after observation over a period of time. If I'm traveling with a group, the other members of my party who checked in before me were assigned rooms 417, 418, and 419. Then my room assignment of 420 doesn't look quite so random anymore.
Lacking purpose or cause is a crucial quality of random selection systems. Even if they were unpredictable and free from any discernible pattern, if someone has control over the system, then even if it appears to be evenly distributed and each selection is a surprise, we can no longer call it random.
And then independence from prior events means that lightning can strike twice in the same place, or the person can be chosen more than once.
Because of governmental regulations, our random programs have to be governed by a formal chance process.
Perfect. And lastly here, stochastic means the randomness can be used to statistically analyze but not predict the data.
So I want to jump in and talk for a moment about the difference between true randomness and pseudorandom number generators. True randomness exists in nature in the decay of nuclear elements. It occurs in the static that you hear when you're in between stations on the radio. It occurs in the Brownian motion of molecules in a liquid. But these are not easy to harness and put into computer software. So we have, and scientists have, sophisticated mathematical algorithms that produce a series of numbers that, for all intents and purposes, are indistinguishable from random numbers. And pseudo-random numbers are what we use in software. At this point, we really want to separate ourselves from the popular usage of the word random. When we say an event is random, we often just mean it's unpredictable to us, that we don't see any pattern, that we don't have any control over it. But underneath it all, we know there's a reason that I got a specific hotel room, and we know that the computer's freezing is caused by some sequence of events. We say it's random, but we're really just using the word to mean it's out of our control. This presumption of an underlying cause is often well-founded. However, when events are truly random, unpredictable, patternless, free from human control, independent from the past, and governed by a formal chance process, the suspicion of unrandomness can arise. So it's time now to make very important point number one. We have to decouple the word random from our everyday definition. When we talk about random selections, we're using the mathematical definition, not the one we use in normal conversation. This conflict between the formal definition of randomness and our common usage, that is, the conflict between understanding and instinct, creates a major challenge for everyone. As we proceed today, we're going to explore this in more detail. Next slide.
All right, performing random selections, there are a couple things to keep in mind. First, the scientifically valid methods, we often use the analogy of drawing names out of a hat. While the concept, it does hold true, as David discussed, there are many factors that play into what name is chosen. For example, are all the pieces of paper the same size and folded the same way? If you could feel, your feel could impact the chooser's choice. Do all the names fall out of the hat, or are they pulled out of the hat? And if they're pulled out of the hat, is the chooser wearing gloves to avoid connecting with a certain piece of paper, or either temperature-wise or the field. And while these may sound absurd, the reality is that we all have pre-programmed preferences in our lenses or how we view the world. And these preferences play out subconsciously. While these may not always be predictable, they will impact the outcome to a degree. In addition, continuing on with the example of the names in a hat, whose names are in the hat? How many times is your name in the hat? Is it only your name in the hat? And if so, obviously that's going to affect the outcome of the selections. So these are some of the potential issues with the hat analogy. You need it to be defensible, and therefore you need a scientifically valid method of selecting randoms. Next, the equal chance of being selected for all participants. I love this one. This is a true random, and one of the most common concerns brought to any drug testing provider is that the same donor is being selected more than once in a calendar year. Oftentimes we hear things like, they were selected the last 4 times. Can't we choose somebody new? We'll discuss this concern in greater detail in a few minutes, but if the selection process knows that an individual was tested last month and passes them over because of that historical fact, then the process is not really random. There's logic to it and there's thought built in. Now, while most companies administering or running a random program would prefer this process versus a true random, the thought process here goes against the very definition of randomness. Next, unannounced and unpredictable testing. This is also one that is consistent and common. As providers, we often hear people say, hey, Thursdays are going to be best for us to get the most people. While this may be true, I definitely don't doubt that Thursdays might be the better day to test a bunch of people, but doing testing on Thursdays only, it becomes very predictable. And very predictable to especially those that are using substances, prohibited substances. Those folks are hypersensitive to any type of patterns like this. They're looking for when testing occurs. And the other thing is if you have shift changes, oftentimes people, a lot of companies will say, hey, let's do all the testing at or around shift change. That way we can get the outgoing shift and the incoming shift. Again, it's also, it's easier, it's more efficient, but it's also predictable. And so if you're doing that, mix things up a little bit, test in the middle of the shifts, even if it's the late one. And then lastly, spread throughout the year. We don't see this issue as much as we used to, or at least I hope we don't, but loading up on randoms in November and December, it's rough. First of all, everybody's on vacation or things are just crazy busy during that time of year. It's also ineffective, but it also goes against DOT regulations. They want everything spread throughout the year.
So what does random mean to the DOT? Although each administration has the right to determine its own requirements, most of them have adopted the exact same language. The key concept here is that you need to have a scientifically valid method where each covered employee shall have an equal chance of being selected each time selections are made. Now, the FAA, as usual, is marching to the beat of its own drummer here, but they should be commended because they've provided robust language that eloquently summarizes what is on everyone's mind. Objective, neutral criteria must be used, that every employee has a substantially equal chance of being selected. Also, the process must be verifiable and no selection can be made at the employer's discretion.
Good points, David, and I like that objective and neutral criteria verbiage. In addition, DOT also looks at handling non-cooperative employers. These are companies who do not perform the random selections that have been made for them. These types of companies, they do 2 things and neither are good. First, they shift the burden of compliance to other companies, especially if they're operating in a consortium or consortium, some people call it. If these companies don't do their test, the burden then becomes on the other companies to make up for the shortfall. The second, they create a liability for those that are also in the pool or the shared pool with them. Testing providers should and can issue notice letters to these employers that aren't doing their testing and let them know that it is a requirement and that you as a provider are aware of their non-compliance. If the non-compliance continues, then a letter of warning is a logical and a good next step. And after that, if non-compliance continues, removing them from the shared or the consortium pool is fair. Either setting them up with their own pool or helping them even find another provider if they're really not being responsive and not doing their tests. I know a lot of people don't want to lose clients, but if the client isn't doing testing, really you're just the provider's doing a lot of work. They're updating random pools, they're getting new lists, they're generating the random selections, and they're sending them out as well as following up. And if no tests are being done, it's just a greater burden on everybody involved.
And I'm going to jump in and say that it gives you liability as a third-party administrator because the DOT says the TPA stands in the shoes of the employer. So if your employer is non-compliant and you tolerate that, then that implicates you.
Good point. And I know there was a lot of talk about that prior to 2020, and I'm sure it's on everybody's radar. There are going to be some potentially consequences to providers if they're not following the DOT regulations as well. So yeah, thank you, David. And then lastly, there are specific considerations. First, just remember there's no mixing of DOT and non-DOT pools. You can't combine pools of employees that are non-DOT as well as DOT employees. Keep those separate. And then one other thing that popped up on occasion is for example, school bus drivers. They work 9 months out of the year. They may have summers off, or if they're a rotating shift, they'll have a month off in between. And so with that, you'll need to adjust your random selections to reflect the times that they're working. So with that, just a few of the DOT guideline overviews.
So in contrast to the DOT, you might think that by definition, unregulated random testing means that there are no rules that need to be followed. But if your random program is going to work effectively, everyone involved must perceive it as being impartial. That means that all of the actions you take on behalf of an unregulated employer should comply with that company's written policy.
And in addition, handling non-cooperative employers in the non-DOT world is the recommendation is the first thing to do is review their company policy, see what the policy states, and see what they're falling short in or they're not following. Once you identify what the requirement is, communicate to the customer or the employer what they need to do to adjust their policy or adjust their practice to meet their policy. And if it's outdated or doesn't work for them, to take the time to communicate, talk to them about it, consult with them, and find out what the best practice will be for them to make a policy that works for them, update it, and let their employees know.
So weighted randoms is something that can happen in unregulated testing, and this concept is very popular, and I think a lot of DOT employers wish they could have it. And the concept is it can tip either of two ways. So one way is I want to have a random program, but I don't want the same person to be selected too frequently, and so there would be a parameter, and the way we do it in DrugPak is you can specify the number of days that a person is excluded from random pools after they've had a random test. And then the other way to do it is to make sure that people are tested within a certain period of time. And you can, in DrugPak, you can say, if a member of the pool has not been tested in so many days, then they must be selected in that selection.
No, those are good points, and yeah, weighted randoms are very popular in the non-DOT guidelines. They're especially to make sure that the company goals are achieved, right? And then lastly, there are state laws. They can govern whether and how you perform random testing. So do check your state and local laws. There are even some cities that have different requirements for random testing. One state to point out, just in California, I pulled this. It says, while a majority of the Supreme Court has not yet expressly reached the issue of random drug testing under the California Constitution, in the Fourth Amendment context, the courts generally hold a drug test of an existing employee without individualized suspicion is unreasonable unless the employee is in a safety sensitive or security position. And so do check your state and local laws just to make sure there aren't any limitations or restrictions there.
So next, we're going to talk through some scenarios that they're not rare, and they can occur in a random program and create some consternation. So I'm going to pose most of these. I think we're going to trade off actually, but questions for Rick first off. What would happen? What should you do if you run a random selection and then forgot you ran it and immediately run it again? Now you've run 2 random selections. Nothing has changed except the outcomes. This happens. What should you do, Rick?
David, thank you, and it does happen. And everyone, these are a little bit. I've got a little PTSD when we went through these, because they do happen. And sometimes you're thinking to yourself, how does this happen? And I remember the first time that this happened, I actually, was a little bit. I was totally baffled. But what happens? Yeah, a company gets generated 2 random lists for a selection period. And in my case, the first time it happened, it was a monthly selection, and they had 2 random lists. And so the question becomes, either the client identifies it or somebody on your team, and do you take the first list, or do you take the second list, or do you scrap them both and run a 3rd list? And the recommendation is always to take the first list. The reasoning behind that is because if you do choose the second list, there is a perception that you chose it for a reason. You didn't like that first list, and because you had a second one, something on that list felt better to you, right? And so the first list was the true random, and so it's best to go with that one. The only exception to that is if there was something with the integrity of the data. For example, you found out that somebody was missing, or there was people on there more than once. But that's the general recommendation in this scenario. David, would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right.
And I think it's important to note that that event should be thoroughly documented. You need to have a system for tracking all kinds of irregularities with your random program, and you should definitely document that and make it known.
Now, great point. I failed to mention that. Thank you. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Document it. This is testing the doppelganger. A random test result comes in from the lab, and you're trying to match it up, and you notice that the participant was in your pool twice with maybe two different donor ID numbers. Again, this one happens on occasion. It baffles me each time it happens. But in this case, David, what's the best thing for the client to do?
All right, well, for one thing, what you need to do is you need to correct the error. There are 2 donors. Well, it's one donor with 2 records. You need to reconcile them and merge them through whatever mechanism your system allows, and that can involve merging different testing histories. Like you might have the pre-employment test under one ID, where they were imported under their social security number, and you have a pre-employment test, and then later as a hire they're in there with just a license number. So they have a pre-employment test on one record and now a random test on another record. Probably the best thing to do would be to recreate that pre-employment test on the test that was randomly selected, and merge those participants however possible. The other thing you need to do is report it and be honest with your employer and just say, look, we found this irregularity. See if you can figure out how it happened. What are you going to do to prevent it from happening again? And document the event thoroughly. In the donor record, I think, is a good idea, as well as in your general event log. Certainly what you don't want to happen is for someone to, ideally we want to prevent this and engage in all kinds of activities to ensure that your participant rosters are up to date and that only people who are active and employed are in your random pool. But you want to ensure that you have good quality data up front, and any irregularities are documented. So here we are. This is again the uncooperative employer. We touched on this a little bit before, but I think it's worth revisiting. To make life easier, you grouped similar employees into a consortium for random selections. But there's one employer who just doesn't cooperate and doesn't complete their test within the testing period, and then later you have to increase your random selections to make up for the shortfall, and that falls on other companies who are now paying for tests. What do you do? Tell me again, Rick. How do we manage this?
No, David, you're right. We did touch on this already a couple times, but we learn by repetition, so it is good to revisit one last time, and that is communication is key. Talk to your client, talk to your company, your client there, and explain to them what they're not doing. Reach out, find out if there's a reason they're not performing or conducting their randoms. I know everybody on the call has had a wide variety of reasons that this happens. Sometimes they're sending them down to the collection site and the collection site's using the wrong form, right? Either way, for whatever the reason, you as the TPA, the provider, need to find out what's going on and correct it, or help them correct it rather. If it's a cultural thing, meaning the company culture has changed and they need to do randoms differently, it's great to identify that and adjust the testing as appropriate. But reach out to them, find out what's going on, and then look for ways to remedy it. If it is a DOT employer, DOT covered employer, do let them know. This is non-compliance, and if they're going to continue it, then you'll need to not be their TPA anymore. So. All right, this one's fun also, handling repeat selections. We do get this concern a lot from employers, and basically, and this is a quote right from one of from David's past there in the yellow. I'll just keep running and canceling random batches until I get what I want. So when you hear this concern, David, what are some of the ways you can help the employer with understanding what they should be doing here?
Yeah. So in the next several slides are really going to be focusing on how to handle repeat selections. There isn't a silver bullet to do it. Repeat selections are complex, and they can have just issues about the perception of randomness, and they can also have technical factors influencing multiple selections, like our doppelganger before. That doppelganger, there were 2 copies of that person in the database, and I have seen I've seen more. I've seen 3 and 4 copies of the same person eligible in randoms, and that person is twice as eligible, twice as likely, 3 times as likely, 4 times as likely to be selected. So it's nuanced, but usually the main thing to do is you want to tell them, okay, to be patient, that repeat selections are normal. Provide them with a publication from your company that addresses your concerns, and we're going to talk about that, and how you could get some kind of form letter that tells them about their random programs. But you do have to investigate, and that's what we're going to talk about on our next slide.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, David. This does happen on a regular basis, and I remember the first one that got escalated in my career. There was a company that was they were a pharmacy company, so they had pharmacists that we were testing, and they called up and the contact for the pharmacy called up, and they were livid. She said, "Hey, you know what? We've got a pharmacist that's very upset. They feel like they're being targeted." And they've been selected 4 times in a row now. This company, it's worth mentioning, they did monthly testing or monthly selections. And I happened to be in my my boss's office at the time, my business partner, and he said he handled it beautifully. And he said he took the concern and he says, "Hey, I understand. We got the information about who the employee was who had been selected 4 times in a row." And he says, "We don't mind pinging our defenses." He says, "Give me a few minutes," and he says, we'll get back to you with after we run a few reports. So the first thing we did is we ran a 6-month report just to see how often this person had been selected. And it turns out after we ran the 6-month report, the person had only been selected twice. Once 4 months ago, and then the second selection was the current month that we were in. And so we looked at it. We looked for doppelgangers. We looked for anything that could have led to a misunderstanding on our end. And so we after exhausting that, we decided to back it up, and we even ran the test. We ran the report back 2 years. So now we had 24 months of history, and we looked, and in that 24 months, that person had been working for the company, but they hadn't had any random selections. So the reality was that they had 2 selections in 24 months. It just so happened that the 2 selections actually came in, a space of 4 months, but the perception was that they had been selected each and every time. So once we had these facts, we called our contact back and we asked him, or we shared this information with him. And as we did so, a light went on there, and we even asked the additional question: maybe this employee works for another company and they've been selected random there. Could that be a possibility? Our records just show that they've only been selected twice, once 4 months ago and once today. And so with that, they were able to go back, have a conversation with the employee, and find out, basically, yeah, it was just a perception. They felt picked on because when they had been selected 4 months ago, some coworkers had made a comment about it. And then here, fast forward 4 months later, they've been selected again, and they just felt like it had been more than it had been. So the first thing to do is to investigate it. It's okay to go ahead and go back and ping your defenses, take a look at what happened, and get all the relevant history and facts. With that, check the data and the configuration. That had something happened, we would have done that as well. Just looked at how many times the pool had been updated. Were we getting monthly updates like we should have been, and were we pulling the right numbers? As you see there on the screen, there could be duplicates in the system, as we've talked about already with the doppelgangers. So we look for those types of errors or integrity issues with the data. And then lastly there, selection rates and frequency. Look at how many people we're testing, make sure we're doing that properly. And then what's the frequency? Are we doing it monthly or quarterly? Obviously, if we're doing monthly selections, you're going to have a higher probability of selecting the donor again each month. And then lastly, consider what didn't happen as well as what did happen. And when you're looking at that, as you're identifying the facts of the situation, you just look for the facts. And as you do those things, it'll help you understand the random process better. You can explain it to your employees better, and you can feel more confident in what truly is taking place.
So, if it comes down to it, there may be enough doubt about the system that you want to, validate that the system is indeed random. And to do this, there are a number of common statistical tests that you can use to examine the randomness of numbers and sequences of numbers. The arithmetic mean principle averages all the values in a random sequence of numbers, and the more random those numbers are, and the more numbers you have, the average of all the numbers should approach the midpoint of the range. Student's t-test is a fun test. It was actually devised by a worker at the Guinness Brewery of Dublin, Ireland, and it was used for selecting samples for quality control. And it has become a very popular test for evaluating surveys and psychological studies and many other purposes. The Monte Carlo value for pi is pretty cool, has a cool name. The principle is if you plot random points in a square and then draw an inscribed circle and compare the number of points that fall inside the circle to those that fall outside the circle, you can get a ratio that approaches the value of pi. So that I think is pretty cool. I think pi is a pretty cool number. Autocorrelation is a special number. You might have like a list of numbers that seem random, but there actually are relations to itself. So one example might be the number 5 is randomly selected, and the number 5 never occurs twice in a row. It might occur, with a skip, 5 something 5, but 5 never shows up. That would have an autocorrelation of 1. That means that they never occur within one of one another. So if numbers don't repeat, it's not random. The numbers have to repeat. I mean, unless you have enough numbers, right? So finally is the chi-square test. And the calculation for it is displayed here. It's integral calculus. Rick, you care to explain how that works?
It's far too easy. I don't want to.
I mean, the fact is that all of these statistical tests are probably not within the expertise of anyone here, anyone listening. Probably we don't have any mathematicians or statisticians here. Maybe some, and so for that purpose, I would say if you really have doubts, you need to hire an independent statistician, a mathematician, someone with experience in this type of mathematics, because there's more than one formula that needs to be examined to determine the randomness of things. But it's important to note that random selection outcomes are very complex beasts. It's not just a list of random numbers to evaluate are they random or not. You have the frequency of selection to consider. But meanwhile, people are coming into the pool, they're leaving the pool. Sometimes entire companies are coming in and out of pools, and there's a lot of turnover. But maybe a couple people have been there for years. So those people are going to be selected more often over time than other people. So it can be hard to develop appropriate experiments to evaluate the randomness of a random program. But again, you definitely would need a professional. So I think that's that.
All right. Thanks, David. The key concepts here, we're going to reverse this. We got the next very important point there at the bottom, and that it reads, the perception of fairness is just as important as the actual fairness of the random selection process. And so understanding it is the key to this. With that, you got at the top there, randomness versus perceived fairness, and that is we as humans, we like to make sense out of our world, right? We like to see patterns or think, hey, this should be a little bit more spread out. Random testing should be a little bit more peppered than it seems to be. With multiple selections, the same donor being selected 2 months in a row or two periods in a row. And so with that, avoid your bias in the selection methods. In short, resist the temptation to intervene. Oftentimes, when randoms are selected and concerns are brought up, the easy answer is to, yeah, you're right, you are being picked on. let's go back and re-pull or generate another list. And so with that, avoid the temptation to intervene and seek to understand how randomness really works. In a few minutes, David's going to talk about our perception of things as well as true random and what the probabilities are. But with that, understanding is the key, and so education is part of that understanding.
So we're going to talk about understanding randomness because we want you to understand how randomness manifests itself in a random selection program, and we want to first of all reset your expectations about what is normal in a random distribution of selections, in a sequence of selections, so that ultimately you can detect when some logic is not correct. We want to talk about how people interpret random events. Randomness runs contrary to our instincts. We tend to feel that there's cause and effect. There's a law of cause and effect, and we feel that there's always has to be an underlying reason for things. So we have to look out for that. And because of our nature of looking for patterns, we resist accepting that randomness actually exists at all. And there are a number of common fallacies that people will express in terms of random selections, and they'll use these arguments to tell you that your system isn't random, and you should be able to recognize these when they come up and not be rattled. Okay, so the first one is affirming the consequent. This fallacy takes this form. If A is true, B will happen. We accept that. B happened. Therefore, A is true. It's not necessarily true if there's more than one cause for B. So people will say, if I was more likely to be selected than other people, then I would be selected more often. So then I was selected more often. Therefore, I must be more likely to be selected. But the fault here is that that's not the cause of being selected more often. Okay, correlation implies causation. This fallacy takes the form A and B always occur together, or even B always happens after A. Therefore, A causes B. In terms of random selections, this argument has actually been made. I have been selected every January for 3 years in a row. There's something about January that gets me selected. That actually came up. Then there's confirmation bias. A lot of people are familiar with this. And that takes the form where the arguer ignores facts that are contrary to their opinion and focuses on facts that support their view. For example, this is Rick's example of the pharmacist. I was selected twice in a row, or 4 times in a row, but I was selected twice. But they ignore the 24 times that they wasn't selected. And that's very common, where people will say, I'm being selected too much, and no one complained that they weren't getting selected enough. Next, we have the availability heuristic. It's not so much as a fallacious argument as it is a psychological tendency. Studies show that when a person is asked to imagine an outcome, they immediately tend to view it as more likely to occur than a person who is not asked to imagine the specific outcome in advance of predicting its likelihood. So this becomes an issue with repeat selections, because once a person is selected, their awareness of the possibility of selection becomes enhanced. With each subsequent selection, the sensitivity increases, and their perception of the overall likelihood of future selection grows disproportionately large and can create a great deal of anxiety and frustration. So next we have the clustering illusion. The clustering illusion is the tendency for us to see clusters of data as as being important. If there's a cluster of something, then that is significant to us. Our eye is drawn to the cluster. This is also called the sharpshooter fallacy. And the metaphor is the gunslinger goes out to the barn, pulls out his 6-shooter, bang, 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 bang. And that was 7. But he pulls out 6 shots at the barn. Then he goes over to the barn and draws a bullseye around the bullets. That's the clustering illusion. Then we have the law of small numbers, which is the belief that the statistics that apply to very large numbers should be replicated in any subset, any small collection of numbers. Like, that's not the way things work. In order for statistical realities to emerge, you need very large samples of numbers to get the noise to quiet down so you can see the actual trends. Then the regression fallacy. This adds insult to injury. The logical flaw is to make predictions based on exceptional events as if the exceptional trend will continue. People are more likely to act under extraordinary circumstances. So if something is happening and then they try to make a change, then the normal behavior resumes. People believe that what they did impacted the outcome. And Rick has a great story of the regression fallacy.
Yeah, this one was, thank you, David. And when I started out in this industry as a specimen collector, and one of my clients there was a warehouse, and there were several, there were more than 1,000 people that worked at this cluster of warehouses. There was a gentleman that drove a forklift, and he had long hair. It was down to his waist, and he was selected random for 3 months in a row. And it was 3 months. I was the specimen collector for it, so I knew that he'd been selected 3 months in a row. And on the 3rd month, we were in the break room. He was studying for the test, getting ready to provide a sample, and he became vulnerable with me. He goes, "Hey, it's my hair, isn't it?" I said, "Excuse me." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "That my company doesn't really like my hair, and so it's my hair that because it's long, they're selecting me as random, right?" And I said, "Oh, no, that's not the case. It's truly random. In fact, there's a girl down at my office. Her name's Heather. She selects these randoms. She sends the list to me as well as to your company, and so it's unbiased." And he said, I can't believe that. They give me a hard time a lot about my hair." And so what happened next was fascinating. So for the next 6 months, so a total of 9 months in a row, this individual was selected. And so for 9 months in a row, he was selected as random. We did the tests. And on the 9th month, the day after we did the 9th test, he went out and he cut his hair. He buzzed it. And oddly, for the next 6 months, he wasn't selected at all. So 9 months in a row, he was selected as random, cuts his hair on the 9th month, and he doesn't get selected for another 6 months. The reality is I couldn't buy credibility with this guy. I'd walk in and I'd see him, I'd wave to him, and he would just turn his head, avoid me, wouldn't even make eye contact, kind of shrug me off, because he believed the fact that he cut his hair was the reason that he didn't have to, that he wasn't selected random for a period of 6 months. And luckily we were able to overcome it, and he did understand that it was truly random, but the evidence supported his model perfectly.
And so finally we have the gambler's fallacy. And this is really pertinent to random selections because it talks about our expectations about sequences of random events. Next slide, please. The gambler's fallacy works like this. We know, let's say gamblers know, that the probability of predicting 5 heads in a row before the first flip is 1 in 32. The chances of getting 5 in a row is 1 in 32. So 3% chance. Now in this scenario, a coin has been flipped 4 times, and it's come up heads every time. The gambler says there's a very small odds that the next coin is going to be heads. Tails is overdue, right? It's supposed to be 50-50. And I've flipped 4 in a row. It is time for a tails. But in fact, when you flip that 5th coin, the chances are now 50-50. Even though you're resulting in 5 in a row, at the time you're flipping the 5th coin, the chances are the same because it's random and it's independent of prior events. And this is exactly like what we get in random selections. A person is selected and selected and selected, and they think that the next select that they're less likely to be selected the next time because they've already been selected. And it's not true. This is where the weighted randoms comes from. Why we're trying to accommodate people's expectations about randomness by meddling with it. You can tell I love weighted randoms. I think they're so cool. Okay, so moving on. So let's go on to the next slide. We're going to talk more about sequences of random events, sequences of coin flips. And here I have every possible combination of 4 sequential coin flips. It could be heads, 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 tails, heads, heads, tails, 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 heads, heads, etc. There are 16 possibilities. The odds, or the probability of any one of these sequences happening is about 6%. But the probability of getting at least 3 heads is 31%. I find that a little surprising. Now, the next one is getting 2 heads and tails in any order. There's only a 37.5% chance. Now, I find this unintuitive because it's a 50-50 chance. You would think that the chances of getting 2 heads and 2 tails out of 4 flips is probably close to 50-50, but it's not. It's 37.5. In fact, it's the same odds as getting a run of 3 in a row. 3 heads and then a tails, or a tails and then 3 heads, or a heads and then, or tails and then 3, however, mix it up, however you want. To get 3 in a row has the same probability as getting 2 heads and 2 tails. And finally, this one really, really blows my mind. The probability of getting 3 or more, 3 or 4 heads or tails is 62.5%. You want to make some money, you challenge people and say, hey, I'll bet you out of 100 flips I'll get 3 or more so many times. I don't know how to bet. So this, I find, you can't speak right now, but I'm sure you agree, it's kind of weird that the chances of having 3 or more out of 4 of something is 62.5% chance. I think it's crazy.
Yeah.
So okay, we're going to take us to the next slide. Okay, so here is a diagram that's going to illustrate the core reality of the probabilities of multiple selections or non-selections. These bars demonstrate the likelihood of repeat selections in a series of 4 random draws from an infinitely large pool. We don't want to fall suspect to the law of small numbers. right? This won't work in a group of 10, right? We're not going to get these outcomes with a group of 10. There's going to be fluctuations with small groups. But given an infinite pool, and I'm using a 50% selection rate here just to amplify the effect and to make it easier to read. But working with the 50% rate, so when our first selection begins, no one has been selected. We do a selection and half the pool has been selected one time and half the pool has been selected 0 times. Okay, so far so good. As we enter the second selection, half the pool has already been selected once. With a sufficiently large pool, we could expect about half the people who were previously unselected will be selected now for the first time, and about half the people who were selected the first time will be selected again, and the other half will not. So in the end, what we end up with is about a quarter of the people have not been selected yet, and a quarter of the people have been selected twice, and about half the people have been selected once. As we enter the third selection, we repeat the process and divide each group again. And once again, we find that some people have still not been selected, and some have been selected for the first time, and some have been selected only once, and some have been selected twice, and some have been selected 3 times, because about half of the people who were selected twice before will be selected again. So finally, we enter our last selection. And what happens? Well, everyone's in the pool. Everyone has an equal chance of being selected. Some are selected and some are not. So with a sufficiently large pool, you can expect with certainty that some people will have been selected every time. And even though the selection rate was 50%, the chance of being selected 50% of the time is actually less than 50% of the time. It's more likely that you would have been selected more or fewer times than 50% of the time. But what you do see here is that among the groups, being selected twice is the single most likely group to be in. And if we were to continue, if you were to chart this vertically, it would start to look like a bell curve, where the middle number is the highest and the ends, there are small numbers at the ends. So what we need to get from this is continue repeating selections to infinity on our infinite pool, and there will always be someone who was never selected, and there will always be someone who was selected every single time. And it's, you know, that's with infinite pool. It's not that, I mean, it's happening with 4 selections in a row. It's not that hard to happen. It happens all the time. And so what we want to do is normalize this and get our customers to understand that this is normal and it's desirable, right? The repeat selection is a deterrent. We actually want this to happen.
All right, thank you, David, for those explanations on the fallacies there. And to wrap up this section, we want to cap it with the importance of education. So hopefully this has helped you understand randomness a little bit better, more clearly. And if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to us. This is what we're here for, and we're happy to elaborate or clarify anything that may have been a little bit fuzzy still. But with this, once you understand it, then you have the privilege, the task, the burden, etc., of sharing it with your team and the folks that you work with. And so part of that is, as you understand randoms and how they work, you can better tune the random selection rates and frequencies to your customers or to your employee base. Every company is different: geography, number of employees who participate in the random program, how many shifts each location has. These all play a factor in how randoms are administered and how they roll out in a company. And
I'm going to jump in, Rick, because that's what I do. tuning the random selection rates and frequencies is really important when it comes to dealing with multiple selections, right? Because as Rick intimated earlier, if you just do quarterly selections, there's a possibility someone could be selected 4 times, but it's only 4 times. They could only be selected 4 times. You have monthly selections, and someone could be selected every month. Every month is an opportunity to be selected. So I know customers that actually run weekly selections, and they explain this because of their turnover. And you know, there's 52 opportunities to be selected there. So
Right.
if your customer is in one of those groups, you might ask them, do they really need them to be that frequent? I mean, you know, they have a lot of turnover, but didn't they have a pre-employment test? Can't the guy wait a month before he's eligible to be selected? Does he have to be eligible if he just did the test? So
Right.
sorry for the
No,
intro.
no, just have them cut their hair, David. Remember, hair, they don't get tested, right? So, but no, valid points, man, and thank you. You're absolutely right. Understanding each, you know, the frequencies. If you're only doing it quarterly, you're going to have a possibility of 4 versus 12 if you're doing it monthly. And so, once you understand this, and you can tune your random selections to meet the needs of the company. And by the way, it is one of the things. It still does have the deterrent effect. Random tests do show that there is a deterrent effect, meaning it makes people think before they choose to use drugs or alcohol when they shouldn't. And so I'm still a believer in it. It's one of the reasons I stayed in this industry as long as I have, is because of the impact and the difference it makes in the lives of individuals. And so I thank you for hanging with us. And you know, the next bullet point here is overcoming the common misconceptions. And these are the things, you know, that popped up. We talked about a few of them earlier. If there are other things and you want to talk about them, please feel free to reach out to us. But the more you know and the more you understand how randoms work, you can help overcome the misconceptions and the perceptions that somebody might be targeted or picked on. And then next, addressing the concerns and questions. Do show empathy. These are oftentimes brought up. People are nervous to bring them up. And so when they do, they are in a vulnerable position. Just take it serious, show empathy, understanding, and care and concern there, and it'll go a long way. It'll build more trust in the program and in your ability to answer questions about the program versus being flippant or dismissing it or saying, don't worry about it, it's over all of our heads. You know, those are some of the things that I've heard supervisors say over the years. And you know, every interaction with anybody in this world is either a deposit into the relationship bank or a withdrawal. And when you're addressing concerns and questions, if you're dismissive and make the person feel unheard, then you're going to it's a withdrawal. They leave the exchange feeling not heard and maybe even belittled. So when concerns do come up, please, you know, take a few minutes, pause, and talk to them about what those concerns are. And then setting the expectations. You can do this. We have companies that do this on an annual basis, or when they're doing supervisor trainings, they say, hey, let's just take a few minutes and talk about randoms and what can happen during the random process and how randoms are generated. And so you're setting expectations on an ongoing basis, as well as you can do it at pre-employment as you're hiring the individual. Explain to them that, hey, our company does monthly randoms. That means we select random tests, we conduct random tests each and every month, and we pull those randoms each month. And so there's a possibility that you could be selected more than once in a year, and it happens. There's a likelihood of it. The next one here, statement of randomness, and the last two. David, I'll turn these over to you real quick, just to speak about these two.
Yeah, so at DrugPak, we offer a statement of randomness. And I've provided a link to our statement, and your vendor may have something similar. And if they don't, give them ours and tell them to emulate it. Because our statement of randomness answers a bunch of questions. It provides the name of the actual random cryptography algorithm that we use to generate our random sequences. It also talks about the process, because random selection is more than just a list of random numbers. It's a way of interacting with a whole bunch of records and putting them in a unique random sequence. So everyone in our random selection gets a randomly selected number, but every number is unique. So although our selection method is random, and it's explained in the document, if you were to just look at the selection IDs that are produced, you would say, well, these numbers are shuffled, but they're not random because every number is only in there once. Well, we have them in there only once so that we can sort them. If we allowed duplicates, it wouldn't be sortable. So this document has soothed a lot of nerves. We have had people come to us all the time and they say, my customer's complaining about this, about that, there's too much selection, or this guy isn't getting selected, and how do I know it's random? Just having this document, it relaxes people. So you should get yours. If you're a DrugPak customer, go download it now. And if you're not, take it, download it now, and give it to your vendor and say, do you have something like this? It'd be really handy. So that really brings us around this whole section is about VIP. Very important. Point number 3 is customer and employee education, and the setting of expectations is the key to avoiding concerns about random outcomes.
Perfect. So thank you, David. And in closing, we just want to review the 3 VIPs at the very end. And the first one, decouple the word random from our common everyday definition of random. And I think that was fascinating at the beginning of the presentation to talk about the times that we use random when it's really not random, right? And so with that, and then number 2, the perception of fairness is just as important as the actual fairness of the random selection process. And so and then lastly, the key to understanding all of this is education. Therefore, once you understand it, then you can share it with those that you work with. Thank you for your time today. We appreciate you being part of this. And as usual, if you have any questions, please reach out and give us a call or email. We're happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Rick, for a great presentation. We're nearing the end of this webinar, so let's go ahead and wrap things up. On behalf of the Current Consulting Group and DrugPak, we hope you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. I want to thank Rick Tennant and David Gonsalves for speaking on this topic and sharing their expertise. If you submitted a question that we didn't answer here today, we will answer you offline. We will also send you information in a follow-up email on how to access the recorded version of today's presentation. In addition, we will also send you continuing education credits information for those of you that qualify to receive 1 credit for attending today's presentation in its entirety. Thank you for your attendance today, and this concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.